Well, fantastic to see so many people this morning in here. My name's Alan Miller. I'm a co-founder at the Together Association. And I'm very pleased to welcome you all here and to be part of the Battle of Ideas. What a remarkable two-day event. And in the spirit of that, we'll be able to discuss lots of ideas and have them clash about some of the issues raised here, but we do it in a really civil way. And everyone will get a chance to speak. I'm going to introduce briefly the speakers, although many of them I'm sure you'll be very familiar with, and it says much more about them in the online and on the pamphlet. So I'm going to give you a very short line on it. But just to remind ourselves, it was just recently that after coming in to power, when the Labour Party had said they would do lots of things to help farmers, there was a U-turn done and then a series of announcements made, and one in particular about inheritance tax for farmers, which led to, as we all know, lots of protests and challenges, and led actually to the formation of Farmers to Action, which I'm very proud to have a relationship with, but who really put themselves on the line in terms of doing lots of action events around the country and saying that there wasn't proper representation and having their voices heard and articulated at a number of different places. We saw them get the big supermarket chains to come out and say they supported farming after some of their action. And also in the last elections, the May elections and the council elections. And we know that the public have got lots of opinions and views on all of this. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you all think. I'm just going to introduce the speakers and then we'll get straight into it. So directly next to me is Rosie Duffield, MP. I'm sure for most of you, Rosie won't need any introduction, but she's been a member. She was a member of Parliament in Canterbury, the first woman from 2017, and then very famously resigning as a member of the Labour Party in 2024. And I think one of the things today is about courage, and I think Rosie's been very courageous, so I'm very pleased that she's joining. But she also has a background and knowledge on farming, which came as a surprise to me, but it's great. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Rosie's saying. Then directly next to me, I mean, I'm quite elevated here because on the one hand, Rosie Duffield, and then next to me is Baroness Kate Hoey. And this might be a trend as well, but Baroness Kate Hoey was also in Labour and no longer is. But she's very famous, has been involved in a range of different things, chaired the Countryside Alliance from 2005 to 2010, was involved in Boris Johnson's team for some time for grassroots sport, has done a number of things, but also has a background in farming. So we're looking forward to hear from Kate. Thank you for joining us as well. To the very end, I'm not going to say to my far left because, that could mean all sorts of things. But on the end of the table, we have Alan Hughes. And Alan Hughes is a co-founder of Farmers to Action. And he's the vice chairman as well. He's a fourth generation farmer working on a 350 acre mixed tenant farm. And you probably will have seen Alan. He's quite doing a lot of stuff on social media and everywhere. But we're very pleased you could be here, Alan. Thank you. Then next to Alan is Catherine McBride. Catherine is an economist and a trade specialist, always says interesting things when I'm listening about the economy and particularly about trade and agriculture. She was on the Trade and Agriculture Commission from 2021 to 2024 and knows a lot of very specific granular details on a number of these areas, like the regulations and the standards and how they're changing. And in 2024, she was awarded an OBE for services to UK economic commentary and trade policy. And then finally, again, not on my far right, but at the end of the table is Kurt Morton. And Kurt's a farmer and an owner of Manor Farm Partnership. He's also one of the co-founders at Farmers to Action, a fifth generation farmer on the Hampshire-Wiltshire border. It's a mixed farm that he runs with arable crops and store cattle. And one of the things I've really found, just before we get the farmers to speak, is that it's really been refreshing working with farmers and Farmers to Action, who have kind of got a no-nonsense, kind of stoic, let's get on with it kind of attitude. And the idea that they would have to come out and protest when what they want to do is grow food and for the British public it was kind of anathema for them. It was really not what, but it's always been refreshing, and they've always got that sense of possibility. And interestingly, it's really interesting to see the police when the farmers turn up in their tractors, because they're very accommodating, and I've never seen that response from the police with anyone. So, Rosie, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you so much to everyone who's sort of bothered to come along this morning. It's quite early on a Saturday, and it's nice to see, no offence to anyone else, but it's nice to see some younger faces in the audience as well. I'm kind of probably mostly well known for talking about biological sex and the fact that, men cannot just suddenly wake up overnight and become women. So it's really, really nice to be able to speak about something else that I care really passionately about. And I'm kind of relieved to leave all the other speeches about biological sex to other people this weekend. But not many people in Westminster realise that Canterbury, my constituency, which has 35 plus villages, is mostly rural. So we've got the cathedral, and that's been in the headlines for all the wrong reasons in the last couple of weeks. And the Vice President of America has got himself involved for some reason. But yeah, yesterday is a typical Friday for me. I was on a farm with a huge giant pumpkin patch, and it was really fun. And it's just another way that farmers in my constituency have had to think of ways to make money, to expand, to get people interested in what's happening on the farm. They've had 10,000 visitors thanks to things like Instagram. Everyone's going along taking photos of pumpkins, but it isn't what my farmers would normally spend their time doing. And in Alan's introduction, he was talking about some of the farmers that were fourth and fifth generation. And one of the conversations that came up yesterday along with my rep, Amanda, who's the South East NFU rep, who I've worked with for a long time, was here we go again. We're looking at the possibility that there won't be such a thing as fourth, fifth, sixth generation farmers. That is massive. It should be headline news every single day of the year, because that is part of our way of life in Britain. And I know that we talk a lot about the drift to the right in politics, people feeling, completely left out of what's going on in Westminster. This is part of that. This is part of feeling that our way of life has just basically had a bomb put under it. And I think a lot of people in Westminster, sadly, have this image of farmers from Ladybird books or from All Creatures Great and Small, that they're somewhere else. They're wearing flat caps and long wellies, that they just get up at 5 a.m. and go and do their thing. And I know Clarkson's been a bit controversial, but it has really, that programme has made such a massive difference to people, particularly in London, who've got no idea what it's like to get up at horrible o'clock in the morning, to be there when your pigs are being born, and to deal with all those things that you have to deal with. Of course, we know he's a millionaire and doesn't have to get his hands dirty, but I think good, fair play to him. He's shown what it's really like, particularly the financial side of things. People always imagine that farms are just this rich source of kind of loads of money. You can pass your Land Rovers down. The reality, as you know, is far from that. I don't think I can think of a single farming family in my constituency where they go on holiday even. Obviously they have the odd day off, but they have to share that with each other. You can't just suddenly go off to Spain for 3 weeks or something and leave everything to everyone else. But particularly when we've got a lot of fruit farms, there hasn't even been anyone to pick the fruit lately. It's that bad. You all know this. I think the family farm tax, which is a lovely sounding, nice little thing, isn't it, has been, it's hard not to swear, but it's been so unbelievably awful. I've really enjoyed seeing the farmers with their tractors coming into Westminster. My office overlooks where they kind of all come in, and it's just been great. I think, it's a bit of a 2 fingers up to the government. Obviously it's no secret that I'm not a fan of Keir Starmer, but all he had to do in the last 5 years leading up to being Prime Minister was speak to me or Cat Smith, who were the only 2 rural MPs in England that he had in the Labour Party. There were 204 MPs and me and Cat Smith who were on the EFRA committee. I was on it for 5 years, and then they blocked me this time from going back on. All he had to do was ask us what were the problems that we were seeing, what did our farmers want, have some kind of connection, but nobody in Keir Starmer's team ever did that. I never had a visit as the only Labour MP in Kent since 2010, not one visit from anybody that worked for him to come on farm to see what happens, to see what the problems are with rural mental health, rural travel, the money side of things. Just these are ordinary voters. He's got a job to be beholden, not just to the people in Holborn and the people in Westminster, but all of the rural farmers. I think there's also this idea that all farmers are the same. That, you know, farms in Surrey and sheep farmers on hills up north are the same as Kent. It's totally different. Each county has its own weather, its own different soil, you know, all of those things that you wouldn't know unless you bothered to find out. Obviously, I'm really angry with this government. I will carry on fighting this stupid, ridiculous, made-up thing of inheritance tax that is just rubbish. Kate and I disagree on the whole Brexit thing. We voted opposite for that. And a lot of my farmers voted against. And now they're like, what was the point of that? Because obviously the subsidies, horrible word, but that's all changed. The paperwork is ridiculous and they can't cope with it. So that's all very negative. Hopefully we'll see some positive stuff from you guys as well. But I'll stop now and it's someone else's turn. Thanks very much.
Lots of very important things to come back on there. So thank you very much for that, Rosie. Alan, over to you, please.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for having me here to speak today. I'm 37 years old, fourth generation farmer from Shropshire. We farm 365 acres of beef, sheep and arable to feed our livestock alongside my parents. And of that land, we own 65 acres. The rest is rented. Yet, despite all that work, and under both proposed inheritance tax schemes, we will be forced to sell our land when we only own 65 acres. The machinery and the livestock to run these businesses is astronomical, and the DEFRA's own statistics state that return on capital is now minus 0.8 for 2023 to 24. Last year was even worse. I anticipate this being around 1.5 loss. And this year's disaster, with the scrapping of basic single farm payments, the stopping of SFI to replace it, and now forcing on greening schemes which cost us more to put in than we get paid for, while the supermarkets hold down the price at an unaffordable level, is driving us bust. And that's basically where we are. We can't afford to pay inheritance tax, and we can't afford to pay ourselves a wage. Who here would do their career, their day-to-day job, at a price where they cannot afford to feed their family, and then be told, diversify and survive? Let's make that clear. Get a second job to feed your family, because we will not pay you enough for food to feed your own. Who here would be willing to do that? I'd be very surprised if anyone would. But we do. We do it not to make money, but to pass the land to the next generation in a better state, with a hope of a sustainable future. But it's looking bleak. It is. We can't afford it. We can't pay it. But there are people making money off farms, but it's not the farmers. The processors and the supermarkets are selling beef, for example, for between £24 and £32 a kilo. But they're buying it off us at £6.50. They set the price, not us. That's a 300% markup for 2 weeks' work on what takes us 2 years to produce. This is not sustainable. Ideally, I want inheritance tax gone for everyone, or at least putting back to where it was so we continue to survive. Because the only people that can afford to buy it is the corporations that never pay inheritance tax, which are driving up the cost of food, driving in solar panels, carbon capture, which leaves the land unproducible for food even after they're gone, if they stay, and they're the highest cost of energy that there is to produce. Highest. If they wanted green energy, use hydroelectric. Put it out of every single reservoir to produce power and power this nation greenly. Use the waterways, use the systems in place to improve the environment, not make massive businesses making panels, turbines out of non-recyclable materials which damage the environment, and then charge us for the nose in the name of green energy when it's really corporate greed. And that's what we're against. We're against corporate greed driving up the price of food to everybody. It's not just in the UK. New Zealand, Australia, all of Europe, America, they are all protesting against not being able to supply food affordably because food inflation is going mad and they are all price takers, not price setters, which leaves the corporations setting the price to us and profiteering off us and you. That needs to change. That's why Farmers to Action came to be. We wanted to provide a better way, find a way to get fairer food prices for the public and the farmers, ideally with a maximum markup cap, so if they buy it for one price off the farm gate, say £7 for example, the maximum they could charge you is £14 extra on top. Means you'd be buying your beef for £21 a kilo rather than 24 to 32. That might not be the landed on markup bracket, but that would mean a reduced price of food to you, leaving more money to stimulate the economy and what you spend, and give us a sustainable price where we can survive with or without subsidies and thrive to grow the rural economy and the national economy as a result. On inheritance tax, send tax won't work. Plain and simple. And the current bracket is far too low. As I said, most tenant farmers are getting caught in this bracket. We've all been forced into a 6 to 12 month break clause, which means our landlords gives us a maximum of 12 months notice to be evicted off the land if somebody dies so they can sell it, because these large landlords can't afford to cover the tax either. It's too high. Now, there needs to be something put in place to sort that. Myself, if they're truly looking to raise money to pay for services, they'd be better off changing the stamp duty. Put 60% stamp duty on anybody with assets over 60 million and increase it by 1% per million. Anyone below that asset threshold should pay no stamp duty. That means corporations and foreign investors buying land for a tax break would have a very high tax bill to do it in the first place, because they'll never pay inheritance tax with shifting corporations and shares on foreign assets. And the general public or farmers who buy property and land for themselves to live are not being taxed through the nose on it. It seems a fairer system, but I'm open to any debate with the government. The fact that they are currently refusing to speak to us, the NFU or anybody, just shows they're not interested in a fair deal. They're interested in stripping assets for their friends. Bear I name them, BlackRock. They had a very interesting meeting with Keir Starmer before the budget, which hasn't been opened or disclosed what they discussed, and it is them who's pushing up the price of land by purchasing it as we're pushed off. But this is an open debate for people to speak on, so if there's any questions on send tax and how that's no better, stately because it states anybody who has diversified assets of over 40%, and all of us are being forced to diversify to survive, will get no allowance. So if I've diversified as I have, the fencing, contracting, designing innovative machinery to improve the profitability of agriculture, I will get no relief at all because my assets from that is higher than 40% compared to the farm. And why is it higher? Because I'm a tenant and I don't own the majority of our land to put against it. So this will penalise the tenants as much, if not more, than the farmers owning the land. Any questions, please ask them, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Alan. Baroness Kate Hoey.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I was born on a small rural farm in County Antrim. I spent my early childhood and my early teenagers bringing little pigs into the world, milking the cow occasionally, and my most important job was to make sure the hens were put in at night and let out in the morning. And one night I forgot, and you can imagine what happened. I went out the next morning and discovered why we needed wildlife management, because the fox had taken most of the hens and left the rest of them lying half-eaten. So I learned a little bit then early on about wildlife management. I think we need to be talking about why things have changed so much, even in the last 20 years, in the public's attitude generally to farming and farmers. And I think if we go back to 2001, do you remember Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, 2001? One of the first things that the Labour government did was to change the name of the old Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries and Food and replace it with the words Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And I think since that, the word agriculture is never used within government circles. I've got a list now of the minister's responsibilities in DEFRA, and we've got a minister for nature, and we've got a minister for rural affairs, and we've got a minister for water. We've got everything but agriculture, although farming somewhere appears somewhere. The word is never actually mentioned. And I think the way that it was moved to being the Department of Environment was this idea somehow that farmers had no understanding and had no idea how to look after their land, their wildlife, and their resources. And the idea that farmers didn't want to protect wildlife really, really annoys me and annoyed me then, because I remember very clearly that farmers in my area in Northern Ireland, they knew how to leave gaps at the side of the hedges. They knew about when things were being cut, how you cut the hay or the corn in a way that any birds that were nesting were protected. All of those things they did naturally. Our farm would have been labelled organic, only the word organic was not known when I was being brought up. So I really do resent the idea that farmers don't want to protect wildlife. And of course what we've seen is these huge numbers of new charities, not new, big charities growing up that actually have bought large amounts of land. And one of the most subtle ways, I think, that we've seen rural ways of life and farming being derided has been overall by the BBC. The BBC seem to want to undermine everything that makes the United Kingdom and our British way of life successful and so special. And so they give masses of airtime to campaigning charities whose resources and firepower have been seized by activists, often vehemently opposed to traditional countryside ways of life and farming. And many of these activists display what I see as the self-righteous arrogance that sometimes seems to be the sign of a cult. And yet their views are never given balance and are relentlessly broadcast and foisted on us, the poor licence fee fare. And increasingly, as I said, large tracts of land with huge financial resources, these charities have become as important and more powerful, in fact, than political parties when it comes to making countryside policies. We've got the National Trust. It's the UK's largest farm owner, and its aim is to buy much more land in pursuit of its rewilding objective. It wants to rewild part of its 2,500 hectares into what is called a wildlife-friendly landscape. It's over 1,500 odd tenant farmers across an estate which would be about 1.5 times the size of Greater London. And many of those tenant farmers will be forced out of their land and producing food. You may have read about the tenant farmer who, having farmed his land for some 30 years, had to leave because the National Trust insisted on him reducing his livestock by 85% so that they could rewild partly the land. And ironically, as the farmer pointed out, there was now fewer wildlife on the land after so-called rewilding than there was before food production, and the food production was down to virtually nil. So the National Trust is no friend of farmers. I'm sorry if you're many members here, but they're no friend of farmers. It has been captured by a clique with a driven agenda. And I would suggest anyone wanting to find out more should look and contact Restore Trust, which is mobilising members of the National Trust to return to the National Trust's founding purpose. The RSPB, I could go on for ages, I won't. It's another hugely rich charity, which also has gone a long way from its original purposes. The refusal to even think of controlling raptors means that many ground nesting birds are declining in parts of our country. And what do? They blame the farmers. It's always the farmers' fault. Solar is outrageous. Of course, there are some irresponsible farmers, and some farmers have taken the money for solar when they feel that there's nothing else they can do. But it's absolutely outrageous that the net zero fanatics are pushing solar farms and productive land. There's recently the one of 2,000 football pitches in Lincolnshire on prime agricultural land. Huge subsidies. Landowners, I don't believe, should be getting them. Natural England, again, I could go on about Natural England, now run by Tony Juniper, who was CEO of Friends of the Earth. They don't regard producing food as a priority. And the planning bill, if it goes through, is going to give them power to actually compulsory purchase what they seem, when they think it's necessary. Just one quick thing, I totally agree, absolutely outrageous, the inheritance tax. It's going to affect farms in Northern Ireland, particularly because in Northern Ireland, most of the farms are small and land prices are much, much higher, and it's absolutely going to decimate them. It was brought in without any thought. It was brought in without, I even understand that the Secretary of State only heard the day before. The Treasury has always wanted this, as we know it. Gordon Brown even turned it down, so you can tell that there's something very wrong with the Labour Party these days if they allowed this to go through, and that has to be continued to be fought. And I'm so pleased that the work that we've got that has been done in the kind of more direct action. I always used to look at French farmers when they were spreading manure all over the Parliament and think, well, that'd be a good idea if our farmers would do that. So I'm glad to say that they've actually begun to realise that you do need to actually these days have come out and say what you think and have direct action. I also, I'll not go into it now, but the whole way that our rural life in terms of country sports is being attacked, the fact that it's in the Labour manifesto to get rid of trail hunting now, they weren't happy enough to get rid of hunting, they want to get rid of trail hunting. This is a government that has no interest, no care, no love for farming and countryside, and it's time for the fight back. Thank you.
Lots of meaty issues for us to get into, and thorny. Thank you, Kate. Kurt.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Chairman, fellow panel members. First of all, though, before I get going, I'd like to thank Alan Miller and especially Together for inviting me here today. And they've done a marvellous job helping us with our cause on the way so far, and long may it continue. So thank you all very much. This is my first visit to the Battle of the Ideas today, so let's see how wrong I can get it. Right. All I ever wanted to do when I was a child and growing up was to farm, to be able to carry on in our family business and to be a caretaker for the countryside while I was on this earth. As farmers, we're generally not greedy people. Money isn't really that material, and as long as we've earned enough to pay the bills at the end of each month, we're generally nearly happy. This above point of only having enough money to pay the bills each month and barely having enough to roll back into the business to progress is the stumbling block as to why we simply can't afford to pay the inheritance tax coming into force in April 26. In general, as producers, we earn such little margin from our goods, you have no option but to carry on producing what we can year after year. It really is as simple as keep going, some years at a loss, and put in your own savings into the business, or stop. Think about selling and moving in a totally different business direction. But that latter option is a very hard thing to explain to non-farming people, and only people from the farming community will truly understand me when I say farming and the countryside is built into your DNA. It's inside you from the moment you're born. There is no getting away from it. It's in your blood. You might be able to take the man out the countryside, but you definitely can't take the countryside out the man. Within 2 generations from now, our way of life will be lost forever. Hundreds of years of knowledge lost for what reason, can you tell me? Farmers would be totally untrainable if released back into the real world. Health and safety executive would have a breakdown. Anything that was broken would be held together with baler twine and a 6-inch nail. Potholes in the roads would be filled up with chalk, and the NHS would have a layer of straw on the floor instead of beds. At home on our farm, I say our farm, not mine, as it is a family concern. And I've come up here this morning, left my 8-year-old and 11-year-old in charge of feeding the cattle with mum, and they will boss mum around, I'll tell you that. We all pull our weight, even the kids, 8 and 11, come out and feed. So when you hear family farms being spoken about, this is what it is meant about. It is family farms. We've had a lot of changes to our business over the last 2 years, leading to where we are now. We entered the SFI, and that's a Sustainable Farming Incentive, in 2024. And not to bore you with the exciting detail too much, did this for the right reasons at the time. In plain terms, the SFI pays us 3 times more money to grow flowers and feed the wildlife than it does to produce crops for human consumption. Now, don't get me wrong, I want to do my part for wildlife and the environment and think that it's something that all farmers have an interest in, looking after the environment and the landscape of our country. And it's something we all do out the goodness of our hearts and spend a lot of time doing it for no financial return. And for a lot of us, if we were doing that already, we'd just as well do it and get paid for it under the SFI banner. You cannot blame Labour 100% for the changes in our industry. The Conservatives started this shift off with the end of the entitlements. That was the payments we received per acre of ground to keep food inflation low. I personally believe that subsidies have done more harm than good to the agricultural industry. They have kept a false price in the market for the sole reason of keeping food inflation low. For at least 15 years, our input costs have been far from modest. When you put them against the farm gate prices we receive, we get for our goods produced. But really, in the last 5 years, they have spiralled out of control. Fertiliser doubling in price 1 year to the next, fuel increasing on a monthly basis, machinery prices that resemble telephone numbers, of which all just the above inputs just don't add up when it comes to the price we receive for our produce. We are the only industry that buys at retail and sells at wholesale prices. I think on the whole, we have an industry that have coped well in absorbing highly inflated input costs while not being able to pass this on to our sales. Well, that time has now come where it is impossible to carry on as we are. You, the general public, are now being hit with extortionate household bills and soaring food inflation prices at the supermarkets. So you know where we are coming from when we say we can't afford to feed you anymore. Where does this leave us? How can we go forward? All we want to do is feed you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you. Sobering thoughts. Catherine.
Thank you. Thanks, Alan, for inviting me here. I feel like I should be saying something different because no one on the panel has said anything I don't agree with. I might say a bit more forcefully, the most important thing is farms are small businesses. In fact, they're not even small businesses because we define businesses by the number of people they employ, and most farms would employ less than 10 people if they're actually employees. Most of them are working for nothing. But in which case they would be micro businesses. And it's a very important part of our life. And unfortunately, I 100% agree with Kurt. The rot started with the subsidies. And it started when you joined the EU back in the 70s. Because a small business should have been, if you run any small business, if it's a corner shop, you have got to make enough money to live on. It was a really stupid idea of the EU's to start subsidising businesses first by their product, so that then the EU was storing butter mountains and lakes of wine. But then they moved it into paying people per acre of land. And this turned farmland into basically a government bond. So you could buy farmland, get your payment per acre each year, and if you're an individual, at the end of it, it was inheritance tax-free. And this encouraged a whole lot of non-farmers to start buying farmland. And Kate has gone through a lot of the charities, the sort of RSPCB and the National Trust. But believe it or not, there are also big insurance companies and pension companies that own farmland in the UK. And they are the ones, I think, that then forced the government when they were leaving the EU, because these companies liked getting their money from the EU. I'm not sure that it subsidised food as much as people think. I think it just subsidised their investment. So that's why the government swapped paying people just for owning land to paying people for growing wildflowers. And I've had to deal with the idiots at DEFRA for quite a while I was on the trade, and I'm sorry if anyone is here, but the moment I saw the prices they were offering for people to grow wildflowers or plant trees, it was really obvious that they had no idea the difference between revenue and profits. So they were pricing wildflowers at the same price as the revenue you would get from growing oats for animal feed, without thinking about the fact that before the farmer gets the oats, he's had to plant the oats, he's had to have a tractor, he's had to put fertiliser on, he probably had to put weed killer on, he had to do a whole lot of other costs. So the profits he got from those oats was probably maybe 10% of the actual revenue, maybe 20%. So it was automatically any farmer who was half intelligent looked at that and went, oh, I'm going to plant wildflowers. I'm going to rebog the land. The Victorians in England turned a lot of boggy land into superb farmland, some of the best in the world, by draining it. And now we are paying farmers to put the bogs back. I get apoplectic when I read the rubbish that DEFRA has been doing for years. And most of the people who work in DEFRA that I have met during the trade agreement discussions were vegetarian or vegan. Yeah. And they didn't even understand that the food that they exist on, the soybeans and the chickpeas, the high-protein beans in this world, do not grow in the UK. And you cannot take superb grazing land, some of the best in the world, with an amazing rainfall, and turn it into land where you grow soybeans. Soybeans grow in the Mississippi Valley, and most British people working in DEFRA don't even understand that the highest point in latitude in the US is lower than the lowest point of the UK. We are just in a different climate. It's just not going to happen. Soybeans are a very funny plant. They grow in sort of the humid areas of China. They grow in the humid areas of the Mississippi Valley, and they grow in the Amazon Valley in Brazil. And the US and Brazil pretty much provide the world with soybeans, which the Europeans are feeding to their cattle. It's a kind of ridiculous situation that we've got ourselves into, where we've wrecked something that should be a great business and turned it into a sort of subsidy machine, where a whole lot of people with no real interest in farming have made money out of growing the land. And just when I thought it might get a little bit better, it got a whole lot worse when you look at the subsidies we now give to solar panels. So everyone in this room, if you're paying tax, you are subsidising someone putting solar panels on really good farmland. As I keep saying, some of the best in the world, you're putting solar panels on it, and you do not live in New Mexico or Arizona or South Australia. These are places where solar panels work superbly. They get sunshine 12 hours a day, every day. You don't. And you may not have noticed it, but it's cloudy outside today. It's been cloudy every day this week. Solar is just not something you want to waste your time or your farmland on. And yet, right now, a British farmer can earn between $800 and $1,200 per acre for solar panels. And that money is risk-free. There's no planting, there's no pesticide, there's no insecticide, there's no getting up early in the morning, and I can understand why so many farmers will do this. They will take that option. I disagree with what was said before about the supermarkets. I actually feel that they are in a bind because a lot of people don't understand that between the farm gate and the supermarket, there are a whole lot of people who are minimum wage employees. And minimum wage employment just got much more expensive under the Labor government, not just in the fact that the wages went up, but also in the fact that we now have a tax on a higher employment tax, national insurance tax. And we're about to give, believe it or not, farm labourers will be entitled to all of the rights under the Workers' Rights Scheme, the Workers' Rights Bill. So someone who normally works for a few months a year is going to be able to, from day one, go on holiday or get maternity leave or God knows what else. So I'll end it there. Okay, thank you.
So thank you. I've got a couple of quick questions for the panellists, and then we're going to come out to you guys. You can start indicating. Rosie, I was fascinated, and there's a lot of acronyms, right? So you may well know all of these things, but if you don't, you can just ask. But EFRA is different to DEFRA. It's a cross-party group that seeks to hold accountable DEFRA, and I'm not sure how much it does that or not. But you made some very important points, and I think that it sort of others have echoed that, this sense of a disparity between those making the rules and people doing the work is kind of this gap between those in Westminster and agriculture, farming people. What do you think's actually going on from your experience? Why do you think this is? Because people have said, if you look at posts, well, just pay your taxes, you're making a lot of money. There's some of those people think that about this discussion. Then many others of the public really identify with the public, with the farmers. What do you think's going on there with the people who are running things? Without caricaturing, I can caricature it often, but what from your point of view is going on?
I think it really is just a massive lack of knowledge. If you've been working for, say, the headquarters of the Labour Party, and what we're talking about, or the Conservatives, it's not necessarily a party thing, but what we're talking about is a very small number of people involved in political parties, the running of it, being their staff, and then that party will get into government and they take those people with them. So we're talking about a really small number of people. They're not going to look for experts in their field, literally. They're not going to think, well, do you know what? We really need somebody who knows about that direct experience. And that was a shock to me when I got to Westminster. I got there as a single mum who was working but on benefits. And I thought, oh, maybe they're going to listen to someone like me because they haven't had a lot of people like me in Parliament. I might be able to feed into what it's really like. But no one's ever wanted to engage me on that because the number one thing you look for when you're the leader of a party is loyalty. That's it. Who's going to have my back? Who's going to protect my position in number 10 or as the leader of the party? That's all that counts. So there's this disconnection between everyone in this room who votes and all of your individual professions. And I think particularly it seems to be with rural life. There just isn't a kind of bridge between Westminster and rural life. And I don't understand it. I never have. And I think now that the Labour Party have got something like 70 rural MPs, apparently, there should be at least people who are in those teams. But, I really like Emma Reynolds. She's the latest DEFRA Secretary of State, but she's worked in banking and the city. The guy before, Steve Reed, he's a Croydon MP. Didn't even have a petting zoo in Croydon, let alone a farm. But he happens to have been one of Morgan McSweeney's best friends. Morgan McSweeney is Keir Starmer's right-hand man. That's how it works. So it's, you would think, the public would think, they'll get the experts in, they'll come and talk to us. They just don't. So, yeah, sorry if that doesn't answer your question.
Very good, thank you. And is it expertise, Kate, or is it, it might not be either or, is it an understanding that you could have even if you don't have experience? You talked a lot about a number of things like the rewilding, the net zero stuff, and obviously inheritance tax, which in a way was the thing that really brought it to the public's attention. In terms of competence, a while ago, Charles Walker was saying that we just don't have the competence of people, whether one thinks he's got the competence or not, doesn't matter. But he was making the point about the seriousness now of some people in public life. Is it that it's just become really ideological around these issues, around net zero and other things? Is it that there isn't really an understanding? Is there an actual plan? Is there a war on farmers to get the big landowners to just bank in and take over? People say all sorts of things. From your point of view, what's actually going on with the treatment of farmers and agriculture?
Well, I think as far as the Labour Party is concerned, when I first came in as an MP back in 1989, there were actually quite a lot of what I would call salt of the earth kind of Labour MPs who actually understood their factories, where they'd come from, their mines, where they'd come from, or their rural areas. Over time, of course, Labour changed. You're quite right. It's not just the Labour Party's fault in terms of what's happened to farming. But I think deep down now, we have a Labour Party and members of Parliament who... It's not even that they don't understand farming, it's that they don't actually feel they need to. They don't feel that is something that they need to be, they have seen it as something that is not part of their everyday constituency life, even if they're in many of those 70 rural areas, the first time they become, there's been a Labour MP. But, I have to say an awful lot of it also goes back to a kind of class thing. The attack on hunting was all about class. It wasn't about animal welfare at all. We've seen now there's fewer foxes now than ever before because of the way that farmers are no longer able to control foxes, and they're being shot in horrible ways and trapped and all of that. But I won't go into that. But that was a class issue. That was what that was. And what we're seeing now is a feeling generally that farmers, I think they do believe all farmers are rich. And the reality is, because of the fact that so many of these other people are buying up land, and it isn't now, there aren't so many family farms around, and people have been driven out, it's going to get worse. And I feel very, very depressed about it. And we've got to stop. I think you're quite right. We have to look at the subsidies, because I can understand a farmer taking money for solar, but while that is being dangled in front of them, we've got to stop that. We've absolutely got to stop subsidies.
Kurt, you were talking about a way of life and gave a description of family farms, but also of the SFI and food security effectively in Britain. I know it's been difficult to get in front of some of them, but I mean, Farmers to Action has now in certain instances at conferences and lobbying behind the scenes. But in terms of a message to the government and to any others that want to step in, because obviously others have said things, right? Like Reform has said they would abolish IHT for everyone. But what would be your key message to anyone in terms of agricultural policy? If there was one or two things you could sort out immediately to resolve this, what would you say they would be?
I think it would be great if we could actually get some of them out on farm into the countryside and see what we're actually doing and what we're not doing in real life. We were up at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool demonstrating last week, the week before, speaking to the delegates as they were going in, and I was really upset how we were treated outside, just trying to make eye contact and speak to them. They will not look at you, say good morning, kiss my bum, anything. They just look at the floor, look at their shoes and carry on. And I found it so rude. But yeah, if we could get them out on farm to see what we're doing, and have some interaction with them.
Alan, we've heard a lot of things here. I mean, I think the big thing that got all the farmers out initially was the inheritance tax. We've seen some things being suggested back and forth with Sen tax. Could it go up to 5 million? Could it be a bit more? Is it going to kick the can down the road? Now they've said they're not going to do that. If that question of IHT is resolved, there's still a lot of other issues, aren't there? Just tell us quickly a couple of thoughts on that, if you would.
Well, IHT is the final straw, but it's by nowhere near the first. The first straw is when you can't produce enough money from the product you produce to make a living and feed your family, there's a fundamental issue. Nobody should be working another job on top of a full-time job just to survive. You want to look at the hours some of these boys do, especially the meat lads and dairy. You're talking 70 hours is a short week. A lot of boys are doing 12 to 14 hours a day, and they're trying to squeeze in fencing, grant schemes on top of that, just to break even. It's morally wrong and corrupt. But personally, I think the biggest issue is a lot of industry sections, not just farming and DEFRA, their policies are not written by people who's ever worked a single day in the industry. It's written by a civil servant who has no idea of what happens, no idea how it affects business, and no idea how it affects economy. You wouldn't have a civil servant tell a surgeon how to dip into a heart operation. Nobody would survive the operation. Therefore, they shouldn't be telling us how to farm, how to sort flood defences, how to handle our fishing policies or industrial policies. They should be taken out of the hands of MPs and governments, which only last 4 years. Crops are normally on a 4 to 8 year crop cycle. How the hell can anyone expect a plan with a government in place which can't make their minds up for a few months, let alone a few years? These policies should be taken out, put into boards of professionals, agricultural professionals, industrial professionals, who know what they're doing and can set a long-term plan, which the governments have to adhere to regardless, whether that has cross-party representatives in there for the talks or not, but it cannot be just run by civil servants.
And I think that one of the things that I felt straight away at meeting the farmers in different parts of the country, we went at Llandudno, and you just think, well, gosh, you guys could all stand actually and represent and be, because you obviously there's a big gap there. But Catherine, I suppose the question is, having heard it all, how could you ever make money from farming, right? Is your argument, or is that if you just strip away these subsidies, get the state out of it some more, is that the argument? And then one can still make money from farming and across the board in different areas, or just how do you see that?
Well, for a long time, DEFRA actually was encouraging farmers to diversify, and that was great. They were putting in, often they had cottages that they could rent out, or they had holiday accommodation. Obviously, the farm shop is one of the best ways a farm can diversify, because the the essence of an economy is you need competition. And our supermarket sector has got smaller and smaller with bigger and bigger players. And the farm shop or the farmer's market, of which there's a lot in London, are a great way to get away from that stranglehold that the supermarkets have on farm prices. But also we're seeing more and more farmers selling directly to people through the internet, which I think is a fantastic thing. For a long time, I've had a guy delivering veggie boxes in my area. But now I know of people that are getting meat that way and other goods that go directly to the consumer. And that sort of competition would be great. But in Australia and New Zealand, because like everyone else here, I grew up with farming family, but they took away all the subsidies in the 80s. And that dropped the price of farmland, because right now farmland is too expensive for most farmers to expand and buy the guy next door and get into a bigger farm or a more efficient farm. Incredibly, farm tenants has become a thing again. When we got rid of tenant farmers in the 1800s, and now they're back because the farmland is too expensive, and it's too expensive because of the subsidies. You know, if farmland was priced at the profit you could make from farming, it would be a fraction of its current price. And that would allow a good farmer to buy out the ones around it, expand their farm, become more efficient, and make more money. And unfortunately, we've made that impossible.
So lots of things there, and I want to come back to this, but questions about to what extent inflation, property prices, the role of the state or not within it in an agricultural plan, and how much that's democratically agreed or not, or just by technocrats. All very big questions, but I'm going to start on this side of the audience. I'm going to start at the back and move forward, please. To the bottom. There we go, Charlotte. Yes, so...
Total outbreak of common sense on the panel, and it was really informative. Thank you very much. I'm just down the road from you, Rosie. I currently chair the Faversham Society. Faversham, small market town, population of about 21,000. We've got about 4% of the town as members. And what I want to ask you as panelists really is, how do you think it's possible to reach out to people who are not directly involved in farming, to get them to hear the arguments that you put today, and how can we move that on? The reason why I say this is because we have completed on the marshland that surrounds the town what I think is the second largest solar farm in the entire of Europe. Now, that was supported by people in the town who think that it's a good, nature-benefiting, eco-friendly, net-zero thing to have happen. We currently have a plan to build 250 homes on marshland. I mean, it's being built on an area called Ham Marshes. There's a clue in this. Whether or not it's sustainable, we don't know. All of this is exactly that reclaimed land from the Victorian era. We somehow need to, I don't know, how to educate, to mobilise. There's a conflict between the housing, we need more housing lobbies, the nature lobby. What you're saying is something about preserving farming, but how do we get that message across?
Hi there. Thanks to the panel. It's a great, really interesting introduction there. I grew up on a dairy farm in Devon in the 60s. One of the things I noticed, apart from the fact my dad worked 14 hours a day, was that he had a fixed price of milk from the Milk Marketing Board. What I'm interested in is whether they think something like that. Now, they had a fixed price because it was viewed, the countryside and farming was seen as essential security for the country. It allowed this country to not be reliant on other people and other countries for things that they needed to do. And I'm interested to know whether people think that moving back to some kind of fixed price would be some to the advantage not only of farmers but to the country as well.
It's just a quick question, because I really agreed with your point, Kate, about direct action. And I've been thinking ever since the inheritance tax was mooted, why can't farmers just refuse to pay it? Or why can't we have, I don't know, from what you've been saying, things like some way of setting up people, just farmers refusing to sell to or pay their tax, or something that's mass supported by the public, a mass campaign, because there's so much support, I think, in the country potentially, and so much goodwill that they can't do it to us if we just refuse to cooperate, surely.
Some counterpoints. So, notwithstanding the cost of living crisis, we're still historically living in a period of really abundant, cheap food. I'm not convinced it's the supermarkets. Their profit's about 2 or 3%. But when you look at global food production, we're producing 50% more food than we need to feed the world. In the West, it's 150 to 400%. So it sounds like you're a victim of your own success. You farmers are absolute heroes. But I can't see how you can make money when there's such an overproduction of food. And maybe it's time for some of you to think about those £20,000 profits that were being made on a £4 million asset. Maybe it's time to think about selling some of the smaller farms, living off that £170,000 a year's interest, because you've been so successful and you really deserve our heartfelt thanks. But that's just my view.
Thank you.
I kind of agree with the chap that's just spoken. I wanted to say farming represents 0.5% of the GDP and represents 800,000 people that work in it. I don't know why we want to put so much subsidy and tariffs and quotas and protections to save 800,000 people's livelihoods rather than do what's best for 64 million people who buy food. And what would be best for 64 million people who buy food is cheaper food, which means we should be allowed to buy food from all over the world and not be keeping our farmers in non-profit making, struggling small farms.
Okay, thank you. Right, this is good. Very important to hear these things.
Okay. So David Axon from Together. It's just I'm going to throw this out as a question to the panel, really. I think it feels more like, and I think some of maybe what Baroness Hoey was suggesting, it feels more like an active hostility towards a rooted way of life, a way of life that's passed down the generations. So I'm thinking particularly, so the Climate Change Act, for example, so the Climate Change Committee, who have a statutory role under that legislation, they basically released a target saying that meat and dairy production needs to be reduced by 25% by 2040. Now, that's, to me, seems like an attack on the British way of life. Not only is it an attack on agriculture, in a country which is, really suited for meat and dairy production, but it's an attack on the British way of life. They want to ban the Sunday roast. I don't think we should lie down and accept that as a result, either of the kind of anti-humanism that's inherent in a lot of environmentalist agendas, or as an expression of a hostility towards a rooted existence, a British way of living that involves passing things down through the generations, traditions and ways of living, and I think that that hostility is in part driven by the government being staffed by anywheres who are not somewheres, and we'd rather be in Davos than run the UK.
Right, I'm going to come back out to you, but these are very good points and questions, and we've got a little split in the room, and that's good. And I want us to explore these questions a little bit more. Just as a thing so everyone should know, Together we've got a No to Net Zero campaign, a little disclosure there, and we are very passionate about that. But The question of how much is it about education came up and what we can do. I mean, together as well, we're very keen on getting the public behind farmers and other people and getting them engaged. But what people think about that, you're not going to be able to answer all the questions. If you take one question each, the question of supermarkets, are they making lots of money? Sometimes it's thrown back that, yeah, those percentages that we're told they make, they have a lot of other things that they suck up within their cost margins that are actually profits with lots of companies. But what any of you think about these and abundant cheap food, and should people just get a different job, right, or retire or anything? All of these things, take one each. Let's start with you, Kurt, and walk that way and go that way back, please.
Oh, which one am I going to take? Going back to the last one, wherever it was, the gentleman here. We are a minority group. I think as farmers or people in the countryside now, we are a minority group. And I think if we were any other minority group, not to mention anything in particular, would we be treated in the way that we're being treated now? I don't know.
Okay. Right, over to you. I was going to say something about that, which is, yeah. Well, I'm just going to say something about that because one of the things that's come up as well is obviously some of the perilous situations and the fact it's an existential threat, and that some people, it's been very tragic, the consequences. But also what I love about Farmers to Action and many of the farmers is that they don't want to be just seen as victims, but you're actually active and engaged and standing up and being robust and resilient. And I think that's inspiring, and one of the reasons why the public love you so much. So just to bend the stick towards that rather than the idea that we should get some kind of victim status. I know you weren't saying that, but...
No, I wasn't saying that at all, no.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to cheat and answer kind of hopefully quite a few of them in one answer. But I mean, I do sort of actually quite like the idea of net zero and just aiming as high as possible to protect the planet. Maybe we go a bit too far on it. But every farmer I know personally is an environmentalist. I mean, what you're doing is you're taking care of the land. You're a conservationist. You're preserving the way of life. But also, nobody knows that land, that British land, better than farmers, especially if they go back generations. What they're doing is watching and logging how that land has changed. And if the climate change has an impact, farmers are going to be the first ones to know. They're going to know they used to be able to grow this, now they can't grow that. I mean, for example, in my part of Kent, we're now selling loads of wine because of climate change. It's literally happened over the time that I've been an MP. So I think there are all kinds of sort of, and I'm a liberal lefty. I like foxes. I don't like the idea of hurting them. I turned vegetarian when I was 12, but I don't say that a lot in public because I don't want to harm my farmers and their businesses. And my dad's family from Norfolk have never stopped teasing me about it because they're like, what on earth? Why would you not eat meat? But you can be all of these things at once. You can have all of these ideas in your head all at once. But I think the key thing is that farmers know how to preserve the planet, how to look after things. They're not going to want us to kind of burn in a fireball of climate change. And if having those animals in those places and growing those things in those places is what's right for that land, they will know it. So I think instead of imposing things, and Anne obviously is my neighbour and knows that area very well, so we can't necessarily build solar farms everywhere. I really wish we were not putting them on agricultural land, but in our marsh areas where the second biggest one is, I've been told that isn't viable agricultural land, so I don't mind that so much. It's still horrible and ugly to see that. I'd much rather see lovely crops being grown, but if that's helping the environment, so be it. I think we all do our bit, and the idea that you're talking about environmental campaigners versus farmers, nothing is that black and white. It isn't quite true, and that's something that is difficult to sell as a political idea. Actually, things aren't necessarily that straightforward, are they? As I said, all the farmers I know try their best to preserve the lands.
That's why these discussions are really important. And actually, we think that the way to get to solve some of these things is to have these big debates with the public and actually have a manifesto that engages them and inspires them around what national development would mean, the coastlines, fisheries, farming, agriculture, all of those things, and to win people politically to it rather than caricature them, call them names, and do that, and kind of virtue signal around things. And actually, they made a big assumption, didn't they? And I'll call them now the technocrats who'd often never been on a farm, which is they thought the rest of the people, the urban dwellers, would just go along with it. Oh yeah, just those posh farmers. Yeah. And that's not quite what's happened, because I think the public get a sense of that. So that certainly could be a thing where these ideas are thrashed out much more and heated debates are had, and coming up with a strategy for the next 5, 10, 50, 100 years could come from it. Any of these points?
Well,
Kate?
I mean, just on net zero, I think it's absolute nonsense what we're trying to do on net zero, and it won't make the slightest bit of difference to the climate change argument in the future. But anyway, I also probably am a very old-fashioned, but I remember so well my early childhood where you knew you couldn't get something because we didn't have it and it didn't come in and it wasn't the season. And I do think we need to start educating people that they don't need to have all of these things that are in the supermarket all of the year round, and that we should be much more willing to actually home produce and go back to remembering that the seasons were there for a particular reason. And then on the education side, one of the things I did when I was an MP, and it was very successful, regularly from Vauxhall inner city constituency, part of Brixton, the constituency, we would take every year 2 or 3 groups of young, literally 8 to sort of 11-year-olds down to our various country farms that we managed to get the funding to do that. And that was just amazing, because there was many of those youngsters, they had genuinely no idea where milk came from. They had genuinely never seen a green field. And those kinds of things do make a difference. But you need funding, you need support for that. But if you don't get youngsters, and more young people who seem to be shaping our agenda on all sorts of areas, we've got to get them into understanding it, and maybe there's some hope then for a future generation to understand farming.
Yeah, we actually did an event at Mill Hill where they've got a brilliant Andrew Reid's farm, where Farms to Action did a big event there, and they have lots of young people coming in there doing that, and I think that's a really important point. Catherine, I've got a question, right? So here's the thing. Some people are a libertarian. I'm not calling you names, but whatever they are, if they just think just the market will sort everything out, others think the state has to do it. Is there some sense in which the state can make interventions, like around big infrastructure projects and others, or should it not be that? In the question of farming and agriculture, just how do you see that? Because that kind of then goes to inform some of the other things around it.
I really don't think the state has ever improved farming and agriculture, other than maybe doing some drainage, just because the state is generally run by people who do not understand farming and agriculture. And as Rosie has said, even when they elect an MP who does, they don't talk to them because they might tell them the truth. Weirdly, my mother-in-law used to live in a small village 10 miles from the Kent coast, so I'm very familiar with your patch, and also as the woman at the back talked about. And what's intrigued me is over the years that we've driven up and down the A2, I have noticed more and more housing being built around the villages that are near the A2 on farming land, on the odd. And never have I seen solar panels going on the roofs, and often they're built in these lovely little neighbours style, sorry that Australia probably got you into this, cul-de-sacs, so that not even the roofs aren't even facing the right way. Now, I know it's a bit boring to make a grid, but if you are serious about solar panels, and I really would try and dissuade you on that and remind you that you are 52 degrees north, even in the nicest part of Kent, you are still a long way away from the equator. So that they're building houses that are not facing the right way for solar panels, and then they're taking another bit of farming land and putting a solar farm on it. It is just, there's no joined up thinking about this. If you want to do solar, then every roof needs solar, every factory needs solar on its roof, and all of the new houses they're building should face the right way so that they can have solar on their roof. I'm going to steal a little bit because I like the questions over here. I'm a big fan of bringing in food from all over the world, and I think that's a great idea. but I'm just going to say something for UK farmers. When we were in the EU, because we are big net importers of food from the EU, mainly because even with our new trade agreements, we still have our quotas and tariffs on food coming in from Australia and New Zealand. Anything they can produce efficiently, we still kept the tariffs on, which is outrageous. But the UK has gone from only producing 60% of the food it was consuming when we were members of the EU. That number is now 65%. So without the EU bombing us with their food, we are actually making more of our own food. And I do believe people in supermarkets are a lot more conscious of buying something with a Union Jack on it, with, made in Britain on it. I think there is an emphasis by the local population to support British farmers. But I can tell you that farmers are not being driven out of business by being flooded by New Zealand lamb or Australian beef, because we're still not letting it in. It'll be another 10 years before we can buy as much beef as we get from Ireland. And Irish beef is subsidised. Don't buy it, guys. They're getting subsidised and they're just pushing it into our market. They supplied us with something like 240,000 tonnes of beef last year, and it's ridiculous. It's like, why are we doing that? They also supply us with cheddar cheese, the second most popular cheese in this country. Cheddar cheese is made in Ireland. I mean, we should have done what the French done and put a label on that. Taken the IP on that name.
And Alan, any of these things, but I mean, Kevin mentioned farmers markets and getting food sent to you, and it sounds, I love going to farmers markets, but can be a bit bougie, can't it? I mean, when you got Iceland, you've got a cost of living crisis, and I don't want to patronise people either, but there are costs. And should we pay more for UK food? Can British food be produced? Can we have food security by doing that? Is that possible? Is it realistic? Should the state or not be involved? How do you just see some of these things? Big questions, I know.
Right. Well, I'll start straight off with the direct-to-market route. Now, farmers would love to sell direct-to-market, but a lot of us haven't got the millions to set up a farm shop like Clark's on there all the time to add yet another job. But the biggest issue is getting planning permission. You go to your council and ask for permission to pasteurise milk, and God help you, you never get it. Let alone the ability to put a milk box on, direct meat sales, even a hygiene standard certificate to get a local abattoir, which are closing at record rates due to the red tape, to butcher your meat, send it back, and you allow them to store it and ship it to you. It's a minefield. The cost in that is astronomical. The reason that these local farm shops and farm markets products are so high is the government red tape and legislation pushing up the extra work. Now, I would rather a farmer-owned supermarket, an actual cooperative in the state that states nobody can be buying into this bar the public and food producers, not being taken over by corporations to drive it up for profit. Yes, as said, there's a lot of jobs between the farm gate and the supermarket, but what most people don't realise is the supermarkets are actually buying these processing plants, so they're getting a nice cut and pushing up the price between. We are price takers, not price setters. And from the abolishment of the marketing boards, that has made us very vulnerable. Instead of having one voice speaking to the farmers, then negotiating a fair price with a marked up inflation price per year in perspective of the increased cost of production, we are now being forced into contracts as individuals with large multi-million, multi-billion corporations who say, you take this or you don't get anywhere to sell it. My question to lady said earlier, why don't you refuse to sell? How long could you survive without a monthly wage? How long could you pay somebody who works for you or pay your bills without that monthly wage? We can't. We've been pushed into a credit-based system through the supermarket, so we have to wait to be paid for our product. We're not even getting paid for it on the day they take it. Normally it's 30 days. So they're running off the backs of our cash flow. Further actions. I think the only way for actions to actually work now is to do more of the road runs. If it's a case of the government's not going to listen, which they're not going to, then we need to make them squeal. And the only way for doing that is road runs in the places where these businesses are putting the pressure and hurt on us, which means short-term pain for us, so hopefully a future gain. Right, food. You say we're producing too much. How many people in this world are starving? You'd like to import from anywhere, yet you're demanding the highest food standards from the British farmers in the world. Demand that we do not use chemicals, do not use pesticides, and then you're more than willing to import it from anywhere using practices and chemicals illegal to use here because they're deemed too carcinogenic for our farmers to use those methods. If we were allowed to use those methods, our cost of production would be lower, though I wouldn't like to go into them, and we'd actually have a fairer point on the live market. But while we are forced to take prices rather than set prices, you cannot ask for us to go into a fight on a price war with both hands tied behind our back and an MP or minister in place who doesn't even know how to produce the food they're eating, telling us how to do it.
Good. Well, that's good. Thank you. We're going to come out. We're going to do a wrap. Okay. All right. Well, we can start up here. We're going to see you all. You're all going to get a chance. We're going to move forwards this way. So, yeah, at the back, and then we'll come down here, and then we're going to come to you guys in the middle.
Somebody in the audience over there mentioned buying food from abroad. My background is in the NHS, and I haven't forgotten that there was a pandemic. And just like farmers know the weather will come, I know another pandemic may come. And it really matters that you're able to grow your own food, because there are times when ships won't sail and food won't come in. So I'm just wondering if the panel have got top tips about how we can keep farmland in food production. We've mentioned the solar panels. I know local councils, in desperation to keep services going, are selling off farmland. Is there anything us non-farmers can do to stop that happening?
I remember discussions about erosion of land by harrowing and ploughing. Sorry, don't know the terminology. And now there's direct drill. Can anyone tell me that is this still a live issue, the loss of topsoil? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've heard a lot from panel members about how farmers want to support wildlife. And I have farming friends, and I totally go along with that. However, you look at the statistics, and decade after decade after decade, wildlife on farms in the countryside in the UK has gone down. So some people in the farming and environmental movements are talking about the share versus spare debate. So, do we try to have wildlife and food production on the same land, or do we specialise in having rewilding areas, if you like, and farming areas?
I want to raise another very depressing issue because it's a hot topic, and it's one that our dear friend Steve Reed held close to his heart, and that is pollution of our rivers. We all know that farmers just cannot help some of the pesticides and the topsoil washing off into the rivers. It just comes with the territory. But how do you think farmers have a huge duty to try and stop that, so that we have pristine rivers where everybody can go in for nude bathing? Or do you think the pro-water lobby is a bit too vociferous? Thank you very much.
Great question. Thank you.
So a lot of the way that farmers' advice gets into government is through, say, the National Farmers Union, wondering how well they represent your views, but also that we've talked about the smaller holders, but you've got the large corporate farms with, tens of thousands of animals in sheds, and those big ones, they also have their lobbies and they get their advice into government as well. So I'm just wondering about how well farmers' advice gets into government through those routes.
Hi, there was a lady at the front to the right who stated that we should get rid of basically 100k livelihoods and just eat food from all over the world. However, I just want to give an FYI to you. We already have that freedom to eat food wherever we want. The reason we choose to eat British food is because it's fresher, it's better tasting, it has better welfare standards, and it's grown better, and it's more ethically grown. I just want to give a couple of examples. New Zealand lamb's travelled thousands of miles to get here, and it's been frozen, it's not fresh. Welsh lamb's fresh. Raspberries and strawberries that are grown in Morocco are grown with filthy irrigation water, and Chinese garlic is grown in sewage.
Thank you.
I just want, just as a big picture question, surely it's time to get governments off our farms, full stop, right? Because they don't know, they keep telling you how to grow food, and they haven't got a clue. But it goes everywhere. They keep telling us what we should put in our food. So, like, if you're a food processor, you say, oh, you're only allowed to have this much salt and this much sugar and this much fat. And again, clueless about how to actually produce a meal, and what needs to go into that. Surely it's time to just get rid of the subsidies, get rid of most of this regulation. I mean, why are we not able to, for example, build mega dairies in the UK? It seems to be completely verboten. Whereas in America, food is a lot cheaper because they do it at scale in a way that we're not allowed to do there. And all the other sort of issues that we're talking about, as Catherine said, farms are small businesses or micro businesses, and surely they should be treated much more like other businesses, less regulation and no subsidies, and let the market sort it out so that the economies of scale can be gained, because the market will sort all these things out.
One thing that's really puzzled me is that none of you, in fact, no one has mentioned the National Farmers Union, I believe, and I'd like to know why and what you think of it.
My question is, if you were PM tomorrow, apart from scrapping IHT, what's the first thing you would do to sort out this?
Hello, can I give a point of information here? I've just been to the US 3 years in a row on holiday. I can assure you the price of food is much higher over there, about 50%. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is a battle for ideas, but I notice, I'm really aware that my response to this is emotional. And I think, Alan, you described this as an existential threat. And I think I feel that quite keenly. And I wonder about hope, and I would like to ask the panel members, do you feel hopeful of saving, this very, very precious part of our life here on these islands? And what gives you hope? Yeah.
Good morning. So my heritage is Nigerian, and my grandparents were farmers and fishermen. Then they came to this country in the 80s. So in Altrincham, which you might know, Market Town, the edge of Manchester, Cheshire, Manor Farm is where they lived. So I heard an appreciation of agriculture. So make it very quick. So I wonder whether there's a case for innovation in terms of productivity and mechanisation to an extent, supporting the human element, and also investment. So not buying up land, but businesses investing in shares in a family business, apprentice schemes to just generate that productivity in farming as well. So.
Hi, just a quick one. I've been in the solar industry for the last 10 years or so. I hate large solar farms with an intense passion. There is enough commercial roof space in the country to fit all our requirements up to 2050 without any need for any solar parks anywhere. Just as a matter of information, the 500 megawatt site that's just been given permission in Lincolnshire, the development premium for the developers will be around 40 million. So that's the pressure that the developers apply. There's no need for it at all.
Okay, we're going to come now to the panel. Impossible task, 1 minute each, but do come and speak to the farmers and everyone else here. The whole point about the battle of ideas is we keep getting a chance to discuss these things through the day and ongoing, and it's not settled, and it's a big debate. One thing I'd like you to think about, I think it's come up, well, Rob made this point, and then the gentleman just now, thank you at the back, thank you to the volunteers, the point about, well, should it just be about some bigger farmers? Can we lose this from a point of view what the country needs and innovation and development and investment or not? That's something I'd like to know how you feel about, but come back with anything in 1 minute. I'm going to be really strict. I'm going to start with you, Alan. I know it's an impossible task. Over to you.
Well, I'm going to hit first onto building and rewilding. Rewilding, great idea. Problem is a lot of it doesn't work. If you turn ground from the moorlands, for example, to rewild it, you lose the carbon cycle. The livestock eat the grass, fertilise the flat wildflowers that feed the insects in the environment. When you take the sheep away like they have in Yorkshire, the grass grows, nothing eats it, nothing feeds the other crops, and when the grass dies, you get a wildfire, which destroys the entire habitat. You guys need to actually speak to farmers who understand the cycle of land, so it actually benefits all, not just somebody read a book and say, you do this, and forget everything you've done for the last 2,000 years on it. As for sorting the market, as for letting the market decide, if you look at other countries that have done it, the first thing that happens is the food price goes up. You don't have a market-run economy with a profit for farmers without food prices going up. Cheap food and market-run business do not run hand in hand. You have one or the other. Yes, the government are a complete pain in the neck, and we should be run by individual individuals who know each industry, not by an MP. But unless the MP starts speaking to us, they've got no hope in hell of getting there.
Thank you. No, hold on. I'm going to go to Rosie next, please.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, so many amazing points. And the whole point is to give us all ideas to think about and things that especially MPs may not even have thought of, and we should be. Often we think we know what the issues are, particularly in farming, and they're nothing like what you actually hear on farm. And that is the key thing, because you might go with a list of things the government are doing and the disparity is sometimes massive. They're like, well, yeah, but we're not too bothered about that. In terms of like innovation and investment, I thought that was a really good point. I've got a lot of younger farmers, actually. I met some young farmers yesterday, and it's great. That goes back to the hope. So young people are still going into that. They're still going to our agricultural colleges and things. But, you know, MPs shouldn't necessarily give people hope, because that's also tied with spin and a load of rubbish. And I think what we need to do is be realistic. And I think the public are really fed up to the back teeth of us pretending things are going to get better. We need to sort of be realistic and be honest, which is something you don't get in politics often enough. But all of my farmers, like I said, the younger ones, they're doing things like investing in soil health, new types of fertiliser, new innovation and apprenticeship schemes. They're doing that all the time. They just don't get the credit for it.
Thank you, Rosie. Kurt?
I think just carrying on from the hope there, I think it's just the one thing that we can live for, isn't it? But what else can we do? You know, I don't know what else we can do there. Just going back to over here, what I would do if I was PM tomorrow, and I think it was mentioned on the board here, get some people, you know, in these jobs that have done a bit of background on it before, you know. You've got to have someone knowing about it. You know, the NFU, gentleman at the back there, well, we haven't mentioned the NFU. I'm probably not the right person to be answering this. You haven't heard anything because they haven't done anything for us, basically. As our main union in the industry, that's why Farmers to Action was really set up, because we felt we didn't have a voice for the farmers. There is a certain amount of people that the NFU would speak for, but we felt it does not speak for the real farmer anymore. It's outdated, and they just do not speak.
Thank you, Kurt. We haven't got time for clapping. We have to do that at the end. Sorry. Kate.
Yes, great points about British food, why we should be pushing how wonderful British food is in comparison in all the areas that you mentioned. And that's why we need a much, much better labelling system right across the whole food system. I don't want to eat anything that has been killed by halal methods. We are not doing, you know, it is outrageous that some schools are using all halal produced food, and the farmers have no say in it. I was talking to someone who said their food goes to Morrison's. Morrison's handle the killing, and they have no say in it. And we've got to get more of the small abattoirs back. But just finally on the what I would do if I was Prime Minister tomorrow, I would make it absolutely impossible for anyone to have a solar farm on agricultural land. Quite simply, stop it. Simply. And as far as hope's concerned, the reality is the country's going through huge changes. Neither of the two main three political parties are doing what they said they would do. And I think we are up for not quite a revolution, but an ultimate change. And I think the best thing that we could do would be to get Nigel Farage to go and live on a little country farm for a week or so. And then the reform would come back and actually have a real commitment to farming.
Thank you, Kate. No clapping. No. Catherine.
I would second that, but I was going to talk about innovation and productivity because it's very important, and it's something the UK is very good at. We have always had a very good scientific base, and we are doing a lot of engineering of crops, and that is fantastic, and it's something we've been able to do since we left the EU. And it's very depressing that the present government is trying to bring us back into the EU under this thing they call the reset, because that could kill that whole industry dead. Because a lot of people don't realise that though we grow a lot of wheat, you know, we had fantastic soil, as I've said, and great rainfall, but you really don't have that much sunshine, which is why, A, don't do solar panels, but B, why we have to think about whether we can grow different types of crops. And they have made soybeans that will grow in Brazil when really they wouldn't have, 30 years ago. That's a new thing. And we could do that with wheat, so that our wheat is often green wheat, which is then used, and we could make that ripen at a higher latitude. Otherwise, we have to import the hard yet red wheat in from Canada. But I'm getting a red card, so I could talk and talk about
Just to say, right, well, thank the panel, please, first of all. Remarkable, really good.